Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Scale with Joy show. I am here with Amber Hawley, and she is a coach and professional speaker, specifically talking about challenges as they relate to ADHD. So, we're going to talk a little bit more about that during this episode. But welcome, Amber. So excited that you're here.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah. So, really, how have you thrived as an entrepreneur with ADHD? Like, what made you choose entrepreneurship? I guess as somebody who has that and struggles with it, and then how has it impacted you on your entrepreneurial journey?
Oh, in so many ways. Well, when I started, so I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist by
Oh,
trade, and when I started my business, I didn't actually know that I had ADHD.
oh wow,
Yeah, so I actually didn't get diagnosed until I was 41 actually.
wow.
So which happens to a lot of women because
Mhm.
often the way that ADHD shows up for young girls isn't the way that gets them in trouble in school, which is usually what prompts a diagnosis for so many. But yeah, and actually, after finding out and then kind of, working on myself, and because I work with couples a lot, I ended up seeing so many couples where one or both of the people have ADHD. So it became like my specialty, and I really delved into it and I found out that they estimate about 40% of entrepreneurs have ADHD,
Wow.
which actually makes a lot of sense because there's often that struggle with like
Yeah.
conforming to like specific, like norms that a lot of businesses have, or like, there's this box of like, this is the right way to work, and it doesn't always
Right.
work for us. And so, and then there's that thing of like, I don't want to have to deal with the boss. I want to do it myself,
Right.
you know? But then on the other side of that, there's so many struggles with that, like, letting things fall through the cracks or having to deal with things, do things when it's like, if you're not into it, it can be really hard
Yeah.
as someone with ADHD.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so funny. I have a lot of friends who have it, and I'm almost on the other end of the spectrum. Like if I'm focused on something, I do not want to be interrupted. And I have like a super hyper focus, which one of my friends with extreme ADHD was like, maybe that's a version of it. I was like, it could be. But so what success tips do you have for people, for entrepreneurs who have ADHD and just find themselves getting distracted all the time?
Yeah, I mean, well, right now I would say if you're an entrepreneur, I think dealing with distraction is a big problem for everybody,
Yeah.
regardless of having ADHD, especially in this last year and a half. But I
Yes.
think even still, like you're trying to juggle, like you're trying to wear all these different hats and you have to do all the things, right? And so that's a lot to manage as one person. So with the ADHD, the upside of it is you actually can hyper focus and you can get, go down those little, ADHD spirals, and you can get a lot of things done. And people tend to be super creative. And when they love something, they focus like crazy, right? But it's all those other things, usually administrative work,
Right.
or, those things where it's like you've never done it before, you have a little bit of resistance to. I think my number one thing that I think is really helpful is, well, there's probably two, but I would say number one, if you can outsource anything that, that you just don't enjoy doing or that is hard for you, even I think there's this idea of like, well, if I just was more efficient or if I did it better, then I could get it all done. It's, like they think it's like a personal problem that they need to figure out how to shore up those weaknesses. And I think outsourcing is probably the best strategy, letting somebody else take care of those things so that you don't have to manage all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Um, that's kind of the number one. The other one that, maybe it's in reverse order. Maybe I said those in reverse order, but the other one is I think really having clarity about, what is the most important thing? What is the goal that you have for yourself? And having so much clarity around that and not letting in all the other noise and all the other things, all the other shiny objects, because we do love a shiny object, right?
Yeah.
Um, so trying to be just really clear in, okay, this is the thing I'm working on right now, and I'm not going to be distracted by all this other stuff because this is what has to happen first. Um, and there's a lot of ways to go into that, but I think if I were to give two little bits of knowledge, that would be, have extreme clarity and outsource.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. And I would say that entrepreneurs get distracted in general, like even if they don't have ADHD. I mean, I run a community of hundreds of women and we do some coaching and some training in it. And I almost feel like it's so hard as a coach. Um, because you share something and everyone's like, yeah, yeah, yeah. Right. And the next week they come back and they're like, I decided to do something else. And you're like, what? Why? I thought we were good. I thought you were good. I want you to get a result here. And, if you kind of bounce around from a bunch of different ideas, you'll never get to where you want to be. So in
Absolutely.
general, like the external stimulus, is there anything that you do to kind of minimize or manage that external distraction or external stimulus?
Yeah, and like you said, I don't ADHD or not, this is an entrepreneurial
Yeah.
thing, right? The shiny object syndrome and I think it happens for a lot of reasons, like why we get excited about things like this opportunity. Most people who are entrepreneurs, they have like, this desire, there's a little bit of like seizing opportunities, this desire to grow something, so they're not wanting to miss the boat, but at the same time what I'm seeing is I think it's all these unmet needs that we have as people that are actually driving us to kind of chase the shiny objects. So
Hmm.
whether that's like, oh, I'm afraid, like there's a fear of failure, which isn't really a need, but there's this fear of failure. So let me try this thing and then I'll try it. I'll try it for a week or two and it didn't work. So that must not be the right thing. I'm going to go do something else. When in reality, it's like you haven't even given it a chance, right? So there's this fear of like, if I put all my eggs in one basket, what if it doesn't work out? And
Right.
especially when you have to make money financially, like if you're the primary breadwinner or you contribute to the household, like you need to be able you need to be able to make money and see results, right? So I think there are many reasons why people chase it, but yeah, for me, I think there's a it's kind of going back to those first two things that I said, but I think having people that you talk to, like I call it like having your consigliere,
Yeah.
the person who whether that's a coach or a therapist or a friend, or biz bestie, that's I have biz
Right.
besties that I rely on who can give you the feedback, who know your business and know you and can say, it's not about somebody telling you, no, you can't do that, but it's about somebody kind of giving you that support of like, okay, that sounds really great, but you got to, this was your goal. This is what you need to stick with. I think sometimes having that outside feedback from somebody can be really helpful. And I know for me, like I have somebody who helps me manage my operations and just having her
Yeah.
like talk me through, because she has a more realistic timeline about things. Like I get excited and I was like, oh, that'll take a day, right? We all have this optimism bias that there won't be any hurdles, nothing will get in our way, and we'll be able to just focus and get this done and it'll take a few hours. But reality is it often takes longer than that, right? So yeah, I think like having somebody who gives you that feedback. The other piece of that I would say is um sometimes like you're saying, like somebody's like, yeah, I'm gun ho about this, I'm going to do it, but then that self-doubt or that like
Yeah.
that fear of failure, that imposter syndrome, whatever it is comes up and they're like, oh, maybe that's not the right path. Or maybe they're getting feedback from somebody who has no idea
Yeah.
what business is. They have no clue, but everybody thinks they have good ideas and they know things, but they have nothing to do with this person's business. And they're like, oh, I don't know. Like that doesn't seem like that would work out. And so then they start questioning themselves and they're like, oh, let me change my mind. And like you
Right.
said, you're like, no, you got to stick with this. This will work. I swear.
Yeah. Everything works in time. It
Right.
all works,
Exactly.
it all
Exactly.
works in time. Yeah. I call that drive-by advising.
Yeah, I
Where
like
you're like, it
that.
happens in masterminds all the time. You have a
Oh, for
client and they go to a
sure.
mastermind meeting and they're like, they came back and they're like, I'm doing everything differently. And you're like, dear God, no. So
Yeah.
you're not in the business. They don't know the team members. They don't know the product suite, and they end up getting all these ideas. So, because of COVID, like so many people have been working from home. I mean, people like you and I have been working home for a long time, but some people maybe moved to a home-based business from traditional business, brick and mortar and office. So how do you deal with the distractions of home?
Yes. I mean, that's such a hard one. I've been working with people who have been working from home, I think because being in Silicon Valley for so many years. I mean, for the last at least like 11 years. And it's always been a struggle for people, right? Even before all of this extra stuff, like
Right.
especially if you have kids who are home and even now that most kids are back to school, I don't know about you, but like my kids, they like somebody gets sick with a cough, now we have to keep them home, or they were, somebody near them tested positive with COVID. We have to keep them home for like 8 days. So
Right.
there's like a whole like, there's all this, these things are changing so rapidly. And so you can't, it's hard to have that structure. I think I think some of my advice would be, one is ideally if you can find a place where you actually have a door, because that's the one thing that I'm hearing from people who are like, yeah, I'm still working on my kitchen table, and like people are coming in and out. I mean, that's huge distractions, right? And or people are coming to the door, and they're hearing it and they're seeing it. And that's like really hard to for anyone to keep concentration when that's happening. So trying to find a place, even if it's not, ideally you find some place that's your permanent place that if you're at home. But I know people who successfully have run really successful businesses out of the corner of their bedroom, but at least their bedroom had a door that they could shut. And so they had a little, there's like a barrier to that privacy, right? Um, and then I think the other thing is it's really easy to get caught into the idea of like, oh, well, I'm at home. Let me just do a load of laundry, or, oh, let me
Yeah.
just pick this up. Or, that you see all the distractions in your house. And again, it's really easy to like have that time slip past you and realize like, oh, wow, I didn't get these things done at work, but, I got all the household chores done. But if you were in an office, it's like out of sight, out of mind. You forget about all that stuff until you come home and then you do it maybe, right?
Right. Right.
But
Right.
I think it's sometimes as simple as just like making sure you have an environment that feels like not super cluttered or doesn't have these triggers that remind you of all the things that need to happen in your house, and have a little bit of privacy. I think those are probably two of the quick and easy ways that I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. That sounds awesome. Those are really good advice. And I think all of us are probably a little guilty of like throwing in the laundry in between meetings, right?
Yes.
So, what is like the one thing entrepreneurs can do every day to just make sure that they're making the most of their time and feeling like they were accomplished at the end of the day?
Yeah, my favorite strategy that I will say for years I resisted. Like I
Yeah.
would ask like every time I'd meet somebody, because I think that's why I'm a therapist. I love hearing people's stories, or I love to
Yeah.
know like how or why they do things. And I don't care who it was, like every time I would talk to somebody, I'd be like, "Oh, so how do you structure your day, or how do you do things, or
Yeah.
how are you able to achieve this and this?" And every time I would get the answer like, "Oh, I have a team." I remember asking this like Bill Rancic. I met him at this conference, and he was like, "Oh, well, I have this team and they do all this stuff, right?" And I was like, oh, okay, that doesn't work." And then it was like, then I met Pat Flynn and we were talking, and I would talk to him about, oh, these are the things I want to do, and he's like, okay, well, you have to do one thing first and get that like totally automated, and then you can do another thing. And I'm like, I don't want to hear that. Like I hate hearing those
Yeah.
answers, right? And that was, I remember when I talked to Pat the first time, like that was when I read like the one thing in
Yeah.
essentialism, and I was like, this all makes sense, and I hate that. Don't tell me I can't do multiple things, because I have more than one business. So I'm like, okay, but I want to grow these things. I want to do different things. I need variety, right? But man, I don't know. Over the last few years, I
Yeah.
think it's just like, no, that's the truth. It's valid. It's so true. It's, really focusing your efforts on one thing. So I get to the point now where like I have I like to do it the day before, because I feel like if you wait until the day of, like you might let it you're like having the list of what you need to do tomorrow. And I say I have one thing I need to do. And then I might have up to two more that are on the list, but that would be great, but it's not if I could only accomplish one thing, what would it be? And there's so many reasons like psychologically why this is beneficial. It builds it builds positive momentum. It allows like that extreme clarity. And then it makes you feel at the end of the day, like, okay, I accomplished the thing that I needed to, as opposed to I have this list of 20 things I want to do. Even if I did three things, which if your list was three things, you would feel great. But when it's 20, you're like, I didn't do enough, I'm behind. And it kind of perpetuates this feeling of I'm always behind. And it makes you feel bad. And then
Yeah.
that actually impacts your energy for the next day.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one of those things that keeps us in this constant state of overwhelm. So on one hand, I totally get it. Like I fought it for years. Nobody wants to be told no, right?
Right.
But at the same time, like I think we see it time and time again when you can really focus on something, achieve that goal or get that business to a place where it is really running itself, then you can add other things and it would just be less stressful. You'll be more successful. You'll feel better about it. Or you can, do it the hard way where you're burning yourself out and
And
which,
not feeling very like you're getting very much done.
exactly. And you're feeling perpetually behind. And I've done it both, and I'm telling you, the one thing is much easier.
Yeah, I agree. I agree completely. I have a bias towards simplicity, which has not always been, I've been an entrepreneur for 20 years. Of course, in my 20s, I was kind of like, oh, market opportunity. I'm here.
Well, of
I see a
course.
guy like, oh, there's people that want to buy something that I'm capable of producing, like on it,
Right.
And then
Well, and
over
also in
time,
your 20s, you have more bandwidth. That's the
yeah,
other thing, right?
yeah, could pump out, a sales page on a Friday night, and like that was a good time, right? And
Exactly.
now I want to go to bed at 8. So, where can people find you if they want to learn a little bit more about, what you're saying and a lot of what you're sharing? It's really fascinating. So I'd love to share with our listeners where they can find out more about you.
Yes. Well, I have, since you're podcast listeners, I have, or YouTube actually, I
Yeah.
have the Easily Distracted Entrepreneur podcast,
Oh, that's cool.
as well as the Couples Fix podcast. And so you can find me there, or you can go to amberhawley.com. And, if you're one of those people that's struggling with kind of focusing and shiny object
Yeah.
syndrome, you can go, it's amberhawley.com/, I think it's joy is the one we decided for this, was
Cool.
/joy. And you can get a free downloadable that helps you kind of go through and assess, is this an awesome opportunity or is this a shiny object?
I love
And
it.
yes,
Shiny object assessment.
yes.
Oh, and I love that title, Easily Distracted Podcast. That's awesome. Great. Thank you, Amber. Wonderful to meet you. Thank you for sharing your expertise with our listeners, and I'll look forward to seeing you soon.
Great. Thanks so much.